And so she wrote the book and then went on TV to promote it. And all of a sudden, as it turns out, she's actually been arrested and charged with his murder. That is Kouri Richins, Utah Mama 3.
What happened, and she said, he died suddenly, unexpected, we were shocked. And so I wrote a book, and it seemed, okay, well, that's what you did, and we want to help you share your story.
Did you sense any signs of trouble, any signs of conflict between them?
Not at all. Not at all.
Now the friend who once orchestrated...
Dad is still here. It's just in a different way.
Police say Eric Richins died from a lethal dose of fentanyl, which Kouri mixed into his Moscow Mule cocktail.
Welcome everyone to Salto del Gato. This is my YouTube channel. My name is Marilia, and we're going to get right into the Kouri and Eric Richins crime. Who was Eric Richins? Eric Eugene Richins was born to parents Jean and Linda Carter Richins on May 13th of 1982 in Bountiful, Utah. He was the eldest of 3 children. He had 2 sisters, Kate and Amy, and growing up in Utah, he was a serious athlete and he loved all kinds of sports. Later on, as an adult, he coached baseball, football, and soccer for all 3 of his sons' different sport teams. He would encourage them to play hard. He was a hunter, a marksman, and archer who had multiple trophies. And he hunted animals around the world in Africa, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. And he mounted their heads as trophies in his home as reminders of his great adventures. He loved to have fun and was the life of the party. He had the largest collection of motorized toys possible, which included cars, 4-wheelers, snowmobiles, boats, motorcycles, you name it. He also had the record for the most amount of bones broken by any member of his immediate family. I think they had mentioned it was like over 100 fractures. He was a serious athlete. He was known as a person who was always the champion of others. He encouraged others and would help other people in any way he could. He was very well loved in his community. It was said about him that there are no peaks too high and the next adventure was just ahead. He lived and loved fully. He lived loudly and he lived life with random abandon. He enjoyed adventures from far-off places and just being around his community and his neighborhood with family and local friends. He was just an all-around really good person that had a lot of friends and that seemed to enjoy people, and they enjoyed him and loved him. There isn't anyone who said anything bad about him. And there is not one bad negative thing out there that can be dug up about him so far. Everything is positive. He was a clean-cut guy. He had graduated from the University of Utah with a bachelor's degree in international studies and a minor in Spanish. Eric was known to have a great laugh, and he was never angry. He rarely got mad. He was very, very friendly. Eric eventually settled in Cam, Utah, which is within the Summit County area. And he was a member of the local LDS church and a member of the very prominent Richins family. Now, the Richins family has a very long and very established history in this area. They were one of the largest and oldest families to settle here. Their buildings, in fact, the Summit County building is named after the Richins. Eric had been married for his first time in 2005 to Julie Borgensen. The marriage lasted about 4 years, and they were divorced in 2009. There were no mention of any children from that marriage. In 2013, Eric met a girl named Kouri Richins.
Linda King worked with Kouri Richins at Home Depot when Eric Richins came in 10 years ago.
I could tell he was interested in her because of his employees would come in and go, oh, Eric kind of likes her, but he's afraid, and this and that. And I said, well, tell him to come in and talk to her, So he did, and they ended up going on a date, and that was it.
Kouri was working at Home Depot. She was one of the cashiers assigned to the contractors department. Now, Kouri and his friend Cody Wright started a business called C&E Stonemasonry. And one of these mornings, it was his turn to pick up materials at the Home Depot, and he began a conversation with Kouri, who was a cashier. And she was the one who attended him that morning. And that led to them developing a relationship, dating, and eventually they were married on June 15th of 2013. The couple was referred to as just being sweethearts. Kouri was described by co-workers as just a really sweet girl who was just really beautiful and had a lot of guys after her there at the Home Depot store. Kouri and Eric, at their wedding on June 15th of 2013, somewhere around the time of the wedding ceremony, the late Linda Carter Richin, Eric's mother, presented the couple with a prenuptial agreement which stated that should the couple divorce, then neither party would be entitled to benefit from any finances from the family estate, and that would be the Richin family estate, their business, Eric's business, and their homes. However, should one of them die, then the surviving spouse would be entitled to inherit from the estate. Now, the Richin family we're talking about were a very prominent and established family. They were one of the oldest and largest families of this area, and they were also one of the wealthiest families. They had a lot of land holdings and a lot of interest in businesses and investments in this community. They were financially very well off and quite prominent. So it would have been a substantial amount of money that would have been inherited by a surviving spouse. The couple signed the prenup and went ahead and got married. And then, subsequently, their marriage produced 3 absolutely beautiful boys. At the time that this crime takes place, the boys, whose names are Carter, he was 9 years old, Ashton was 7 years old, and Weston was 5 years old. During the course of the marriage, Kouri became a realtor, and she made a career out of purchasing real estate as investments and then turning them over, like flipping them for a profit. And here's where the root of the story begins. There was a property that Kouri had spotted that was about 30 to 45 minutes away from their house. Now, this property had sat unfinished for a while in the neighborhood, and it had become rather of an eyesore. It was originally begun, the construction on it originally begun in 2016. Now, this was a mansion. It was a 22,000, almost 23,000 square foot mansion in Heber City, and it sat on 10 acres of land. It was unfinished since 2022, so it had become an eyesore in the neighborhood. It was listed for sale at $2.2 million at the time, but the house was valued at $7.6 million. Now, this house had 2 kitchens, a swimming pool, 8 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, a golf simulator, and a rock climbing wall. And like I said, it sat on 10 acres of land. The original intent of the owner was to build this as a place for out-of-town guests, to sort of like an Airbnb. So what no one knew and is now being revealed is that this whole entire time in the marriage, Kouri seemed to have financial problems from within a year of the marriage, and she began to use Eric's money without his knowledge to the tune of over $300,000. Now, was it for real estate investments or something else? The original owner of the property was a man named Royal Lance. Approximately 2 years after the construction on the house began, the development paused around 2019. Paperwork was mounting, and the Wasatch County Sheriff's Office confirmed that there was an unattended death that had occurred on the property. That's the official report. The Grizz explains that the contractor hung himself in that property. Bad juju. I don't know why. I don't know who the contractor was, but he hung himself. And after that, Mr. Royal Lance lost interest in the property, which was never meant to be his primary residence. So by the end of 2019, all the work had stopped, and Royal Lance eventually put the unfinished property on the market, and he relocated to Guatemala, where he operates a philanthropic organization. So then the property was purchased by a young couple who was relocating to Heber County. And this was around January of 2022. They intended to finish the house when the husband unexpectedly died. That couple was Eric and Kouri Richins. They had actually made an offer for $2.2 million, and the offer had been accepted. The plan was that the house would be finished, flipped, and put on the market for at least $4.75 million, making for a pretty handsome profit. But there was this one thing: the house was not finished. I mean, it was basically just a shell. The foundation was laid, the outer structure and the roof and doors and windows were up, but the inside was just wooden frame. There was a stairway, but there were no drywall and whatnot in place. No electricity, no running water, none of that. So obviously it was an investment that would take quite a bit of money to complete in materials and labors. I don't know what that would have cost, so I don't know how much of a profit this house would have ultimately been. Now, Eric was never comfortable with this project. In fact, a few days before his death, and within a few days of closing on this property, he had discussed with his family that he was going to tell Kouri that they weren't going to close on this property. They were going to pull out of the deal. Those are events that lead up into the crime. Eric and Kouri may have appeared to have had the perfect marriage and the perfect family, but there was more going on behind closed doors. Now, in case I forgot to mention, this family is a Mormon family. Eric had done a 2-year mission in Mexico where he learned how to speak Spanish fluently. He did that with his LDS church group. Their marriage had some trouble, and on this morning of March 4th of 2022, the Sheriff Department responded to a 911 call. When they arrived at the property, they found Eric Richins deceased and lying at the foot of his bed. His wife Kouri had called them, and here are the details she gave them. She said they had been having a celebratory dinner party between the two of them that evening because they were celebrating the purchase of that, what I'll call the haunted mansion, the 22,000 square foot mansion. They had just made an offer for $2.2 million, and the offer had been accepted, so they were celebrating. They had dinner, they put their kids to sleep, and then Eric retreated to his bedroom, where Kouri brought him up a Moscow Mule. But she didn't remain in the bedroom with him because one of the children had a nightmare, and so she went to settle the child and fell asleep in his bedroom. When she woke up, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. She went back to her and Eric's bedroom, and that's where she found her husband, Eric, and he was ice cold, and she suspected he was deceased, so she called 911. The first alarm that I have is that these are family members of an LDS church, and typically Mormons do not drink. But the question is, what killed him? Certainly a Moscow Mule won't harm you. A toxicology report would show that Eric died of a fent overdose. He had over 5 times the lethal dose in his body. Now, how did it get there? According to Kouri, Eric had a past history using those types of opiates when he was back in high school, and she suggested that perhaps that problem had resurfaced. However, there's no evidence of that. The investigators could not find even a hint from any of Eric's background that was even suspicious. He had no history of drug abuse, no history of DUIs, no alcohol use. He was a clean-cut guy in the community. He didn't even have a juvenile record, and all of his friends, families, and even local acquaintances said there was just not any evidence of that in any of his history. It was totally out of character for him. So that raised alarms for the sheriff, and they started digging. And the process begins. They start interviewing family members. One of Eric's sisters tells him that Eric had long held suspicions that Kouri was having an affair with someone else, and that affair had possibly been taking place throughout their marriage, and that on at least 2, possibly 3 other occasions, Eric felt that Kouri had attempted to poison him. And it goes back to a Valentine's dinner where she brought him a drink with his meal, and he had a horrific allergic reaction. He thought he was having an allergic reaction because he couldn't breathe. So he took his son's EpiPen and some Benadryl. He's lucky he survived that. He passed out, and eventually he woke up. Fortunate for him that he survived it. He immediately called his partner, Kouri, and told him what just had happened. Another time, they were on a vacation. Eric and Kouri had gone to Greece, and again, Kouri brought him a drink, and again, he became violently ill. So he became violently ill. He wasn't sure he was going to make it, but he recovered, and he immediately called his sister and shared his suspicions. He told her he suspected that Kouri was putting something in his food or drink, because this was the second time that this happened. And so he now had suspicions, and he had 2 people that he had shared this with so that they can vouch that he had had the suspicions and that this had occurred. Now, we can stop here a minute because we're not going to victim shame him. We can speculate all we want about why, if he suspected that she was doing this to him, he would even accept any food from her. You know why? Because sometimes we trust the person we're married to. Sometimes we let our guards down. And sometimes, like in his case, he was very concerned for his children and their welfare. He was obsessed with his children. Now, the next thing that happens is that Cody Wright and Eric Richin had a life insurance policy, and they had listed each other as beneficiaries to cover the company. So should something happen to one, the other person could collect on the policy and continue the business, keep it afloat. Kouri was able to log onto the policy, and you know what she did? She removed both Cody and Eric as beneficiaries, and then she listed herself as the only beneficiary of that insurance company policy. So she thought, okay, it's done. I'm good. She didn't know that the insurance company would call Kouri and Cody and inform them of the change and ask if they were aware. They told him, hey, did you know that your wife called and changed the beneficiary? Did you authorize that? And they said, no, we're not aware of that. So he was able to reverse it, remove her, and put himself and Cody back in. Now, that was his 3rd red flag. So by this time, his alarm is up. But remember, there's 3 boys, and he was a doting father. He was just very obsessed and concerned with his children. And he wasn't about to get into a divorce, because remember that prenup said no one would get any money, and he wanted to make sure that his children were financially taken care of. He figured some ways that there were some things that he could do to try to position his children and the wealth that they had accumulated and his family had accumulated, secure that for his kids. He wanted to make sure that whatever finances the family had would still be there for the children throughout their lives into the future. So moving forward, before his death, Eric also changed the beneficiary of his will and his power of attorney, and he replaced Kouri with his sister. Smart man. He also set up an irrevocable trust where he put all the assets and all the family homes and money in the business and everything and anything that would come from his family's estate into the irrevocable trust, and Kouri was not a part of this. He designated his sister as a person to manage the entire estate. It's according to the information in the warrant, because this all came out in the warrant. He didn't tell Kouri about any of these changes. The warrant also alleges that Eric had decided that he was going to begin divorce proceedings against Kouri, but he wanted to put all those other things in place first. So he had to be careful and understand how he was manipulating things. Sometimes those kinds of wills and things have look-back periods. He structured everything that he could to safeguard all the money for his kids, placed his sister in charge of it, so even if he died and she got the kids, she still wouldn't be able to do anything. But unfortunately, he died before the proceedings began. Now, the day after he died, the very next day. Now, remember that house, the 20,000 square foot mansion, the one that Kouri wanted to buy as an investment? Well, remember, they had made an offer on that property, and the offer had been accepted. So on the very next day after his death, Kouri closed on that property, and then she gave a celebration party at her house celebrating the purchase of this property. And according to the warrant, it says that Kouri learned she'd been cut out of the will during this family gathering at the family home on March 5th of 2022, which was one day after Eric's death, and she lost her manure. And she also especially lost her manure when she found out that Eric had assigned his sister to be the person in charge of all of his estate. She was so furious when she was told this information that she actually assaulted Eric's sister at that party. So it turns out that that haunted house was indeed bad juju, because it was that very purchase that brings down this house of cards. I don't think that's why Kouri killed Eric. I just think she had planned on killing him all along, because she was trying to get that money, the insurance policy, the family estate, abide by the prenup that said that if one died, the other would gain. So that was what was on the back of her mind. Getting that house, I'm not so sure she really wanted to flip it. I think maybe when she settled all the estates, she'd just fix it for her and the kids. I'm not sure. On March 28th, a few weeks later, after Eric's death, Kouri sued Eric's sister for control over his estate because she claimed the prenuptial agreement entitled her to money, family homes, and other assets. Eric's sister responds to that lawsuit, and in her response, it makes mention of a pending homicide case. Now, it remains to be seen whether or not a criminal case against Kouri will affect the civil proceedings. But in Utah, there is a thing called the Slayer statute, which prevents killers from profiting from their crimes. Moving forward, because this was a year ago, so we are now on 2023, March 7th of 2023, almost a year to the day, Kouri self-publishes a book. And she reaches out to a local news station and asks them, would you want to interview me so we can promote this book? And it was a children's book titled, Are You With Me? And it was meant to help children process grief. It was created to bring peace and comfort for children, and it was dedicated, are you ready for this, to her deceased husband. In the book, there's actually caricatures of Eric with angel wings hovering over his children like a guardian angel. On May 8th of 2023, Kouri Richins was arrested and she is now sitting in jail. She's faced with murdering her husband and several other charges, including possession of a controlled substance. I am assuming that means the fent. So currently she is scheduled for May 19th. I'm recording this video on Wednesday, May 17th of 2023. So in 2 days from now, she will have a hearing to determine if the judge is going to set a bond. Most people think it's highly unlikely. Oh, and by the way, that book that she self-published, and she reached out to that KBCW local news station to promote her book. Well, they have pie all over their face now, and they have since done a whole series on profiling this. And of course, the book, who was selling on Amazon for $14.99, has been taken down from all outlets. And I think the actual charge that she is being charged with is criminal homicide, aggravated murder, and possession of a controlled substance. During that interview, she never wore her wedding ring. Interesting. So let's recap. March 4th of 2022, at 3:22 hours, sheriff responds to unresponsive person call and finds Eric's lifeless body at the foot of the bed. March 3rd, 2022, she claims she was celebrating with her husband and brought him the Moscow Mule, but her child had a nightmare. She went to the child to comfort him and fell asleep there till 3 a.m. When she woke up, she found Eric cold to the touch. Now, she claims that she also, when she fell asleep in her child's room, she had never taken her phone with her. She left the phone in the bedroom, where her and Eric's bedroom. And, of course, the phone stats show something completely different. It shows that the phone was moving around throughout the night in the house, and that there was also texts that had been sent, but they were deleted. Eric, of course, died of a fent poisoning. It was 5 times the lethal dose. And there is an acquaintance of Kouri's who is listed only as CL. And I've heard other news reports say that this was a person who had a previous nebulous narcotics history and some offenses with the law, and she had become an informant, unbeknownst, evidently, to Kouri. So she was working with the government. And so she called, I think on her own volition, and she let them know that on a previous occasion, Kouri had asked her to procure some oxy for her because she had a client with severe back pain. And then she called back a second time and said she needed more because I guess the client was still in pain. Now, she owned a residence, one of her flip homes, and she would told that person to leave the product over there and she would leave the money. A second time she calls back and she says she needs more and she really wants something a little stronger. She wanted the MJ stuff. I think she was talking about propofol, but this person said they only had the F thing, so that's what she got. She bought another $900 worth, and this time they were told to leave it in the fire pit at the house and take the money. And of course, a few days later after that negotiation, Eric left this world. He was preceded in death by his mother, Linda Carter, his grandparents, H.L. Lamont and Althea Richins, and a great-grandfather on his mother's side. His funeral was streamed live, and the family said that there are no words that can express the loneliness and loss in every heart that loved Eric. They also said that everybody has an Eric story, and they would love to hear it from everyone, and requested that anyone who wanted to share, please do in the obituary. Their children are with family members on Eric's side. An attorney was hired by the family to be their spokesman. And so now we kind of wait, don't we? we wait to see how this is all going to play out. Now, understand that everything that I have presented here is one side. This is all the side that we have right now. I have not heard anything that anyone has posted about Kouri's side. I'm sure she'll have a story to tell. So, as you can see from this picture, she had a rather low-key wedding dress. And the thing here is that the picture that Kouri has painted for herself is not very becoming. She doesn't look good in this. All accounts that I have been able to find show that pretty quickly into the marriage, within 2 or 3 years, it seemed that her main focus was all about money. And she was already, apparently, almost it looks like she was stashing money, diverting some of the funds that Eric's company paid for them to cover their taxes, and she would divert those funds into her own accounts. So it didn't look pretty. She ran up a lot of credit cards, and she would get credit lines pretty much without his approval. The whole gap for me in understanding is why Eric didn't do something sooner, or was he just too busy working? I mean, he had a huge business. They did very high-end homes, C&E, masonry and stone. They did huge houses. You can look them up in Instagram. But meanwhile, she was left to her own volition just to do willy-nilly whatever she wanted. And it appeared that she was, in my opinion, doing one of two things. Either she was stashing money with the idea to get out of this marriage, or she was trying to make a name for herself in real estate and use that money for investment. By all accounts, Eric was a really generous man. Did he, just object to her using his funds for finances? Did he not want her to be successful? I don't know. Was this a quirk to his personality, or was it part of the whole Mormon thing that the woman stays home and takes care of the kids? I don't know, and I'm not implying that. It's just so out of character for everything that it appears that he personifies. And it seems that they were in love, but something happened to this marriage. Was she never in love with him? Does she just see him as a way out of her situations and a meal ticket? I don't know. It's a gap in my understanding of what went wrong with this marriage. But all of the actions that have been allegedly attributed to Kouri are really, really evil, really deceptive. And they don't show, or they don't paint a picture of a loving wife and mother. Now, I mean, there's nothing that says that she was not a good mother, but I'm just saying that role of her being truly in love with her husband, because you see them in the pictures, and she's just got this great big smile. I call it the Instagram smile. The life is great, everything is great, don't you wish you were me? But evidently, none of that was real. So there's a lesson in that for all of us, I guess. But the evidence so far paints its own picture of what appears to be the truth. Now, I'm sure she's going to claim another one, and I will be listening for that. But my goal here is not to make the videos that I post focus on the criminal. A lot of times we can't obviously avoid that because they are the subject of the trial. They will be the subject of the news media, and it is what happens to them because they're the survivors that we follow. But I wanted to make sure that we got a really good look at what kind of a person Eric was in all of this. And the picture that has emerged is one of an ideal young man whose maybe his worst vice was that he was a hunter of wild game. To each their own. I live in a place where there's alligators in a lake, And in my state, there's an alligator control program. Some would say that's cruel to hunt those alligators. Well, if your pet or your family member was attacked by one, maybe you wouldn't think it was so cruel. So everything in balance, everything has its place. I don't judge anyone in what they decide to do. I just try to, live my life. As usual, these kinds of crimes always baffle me. Why, in today's day and age, would somebody who's even halfway aware of technology think that they could get away with a crime is beyond me. They just must not be as smart as we think they are. They have no idea about technology, about how tracked and how under surveillance the world is today with technology. So I don't see how anybody would think they could get away with this kind of stuff. It's just crazy. I think emotions just take them over and they can't even think straight. Now there's these 3 little boys. And, I'm sure that his family is just going to absolutely embrace them and protect them and raise them with lots of love, but it's not their father. And as horrible of a person as she may turn out to be, every child needs their mother. So it's a very sad situation for everyone involved. And ultimately, the haunted mansion sits there. What will happen to it? I don't know. She put a contract in that was accepted and they closed on the deal. And I'm sure she's got to come up with the money. A lot to think about. I also don't know anything much about Kouri's life. I know that she worked at Home Depot. I know that that's where they met. And I don't know if she was married before him. I don't think that they're that difference in age, maybe by a few years. I think he was only 39 years old, and I'm not sure how old she was. So I don't know a lot about her life. I don't think she came from a very prominent family in comparison to him. So I think she married up when she married him. I won't say it. I won't. But she evidently, something made her wicked. What was it? Was it the prenuptial agreement? Did she feel slighted by that? And if she did, why sign it? Why go through with the marriage? I don't get it. I don't get why people make the decisions and the choices that they make for themselves that ultimately ruins a lot of lives, starting with their own, which is the craziest thing. And ending someone's life, just, what happened to divorce? I mean, I know that LDS families don't really believe in divorce. They divorce each other. And listen, LDS, you're better off divorcing than ending in these kinds of crime. But I think it's like the Catholics. They frown on divorce. So he was a good LDS person. And he, lived by the teachings of his church and his traditions. I don't know. I don't know what turns people the way that it seems like they get turned. It's greed, money. But she had money. Was she really truly in love with someone else for 9 years? Who was that person? I haven't heard anything of that. I mean, it's just so far a rumor and a speculation. No one has named the person. We don't even know if it was a man or a woman. We don't know anything about him. We know very little about Kouri. All we know is what has been said about her, that she was a pretty girl. She worked at Home Depot. She became a realtor. And she married well. She had 3 wonderful children. People who interacted with her said she was a really sweet girl. So unless Eric turns into some kind of a monster behind closed doors, we don't know the story. We don't know the story. But we'll wait. because that's what we do. We wait for the story because eventually it's going to play out in front of us and we'll get to the truth. As always, these are just really intense situations between young people who had their whole life in front of them. And I know I'm rambling on here, but it's just, I don't know. It's just baffling. And what about that mansion? Now, this would be the second death associated with it. And pretty much a loss financially for the original owner, who I'm sure poured a lot of money into it, and for the second owners who, look what happened to them, and the expense that she's going to incur now in legal representation. Where's that money coming from? One thing that is occurring right now is that at the same time that Kouri is sitting in jail waiting to find out if she can even come out on bond, there's a whole litany of other cases that are pending and in process. There is a deluge of documents that have been released, all pertaining to basically the financial fight between Kouri and Eric's sister, Kate, over the money, the trust funds, the life insurance policies, and the assets of the home. There were a multitude of vehicles that Eric owned, and all of those assets, the home, the monies, everything in the house was placed in an irrevocable trust prior to Eric's demise. And the person that was placed in charge of all of that was his sister, Kate. Kouri is sitting in jail fighting this tooth and nail. Fighting. She just filed a motion to have Kate removed from management, managing any of these funds. She claims that she has the right, based on that prenuptial agreement, to be the person who, as a survivor, has control of the funds. She also said that she has not given any of her permission to Kate to utilize any of the funds from the trust to pay for any of the legal expenses or any of the hiring for private detectives and things like that that Kouri claims Kate has done to her since, in the last year since Eric's death. She's fighting all of this. And on May 10th, now she was arrested on May 8th, on May 10th, she filed this motion. So it sounds to me that Kouri is quite a bit of a street fighter. Also, some discussion here that right prior to her getting arrested and really quite soon after Eric's death, that Kouri scrambled to get her hands on money, and she there was a safe in the house, and Eric had disclosed to his sister a whole list of all of his assets in case something happened to him. So Kouri somehow or another found out or knew about the safe, but Eric claimed that he had $200,000 in cash in that safe. Can you imagine having that kind of money laying around? And that safe was in the garage. And Kouri had a locksmith come in and drill a hole and open that safe. So she was scrambling for money. Now, I'm trying very hard not to judge her, but all of her actions are very condemning of her. Well, folks, that's what I have up until now. So we'll see where this story goes. She has a hearing tomorrow to see if she comes out on bail. And it doesn't look good. I'd be totally shocked if they let her out on bail, but who knows? But I'll keep following this story, and I'll update you as I move along. Again, as usual, thank you so much for looking at this video, visiting me here on YouTube. If you like what you are listening to, and you might consider subscribing, leave me a comment. I always appreciate them. Like algorithms like that, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for stopping by.